So we're going to focus now on the reptiles, but we're going to still have to address some of these other groups as well because of their close relationship. So first we're going to start off with this cladogram here, and there are other versions of it that you'll probably see, but they're all very similar, and the relationships are going to be the same in terms of who's closer. Right? We're also going to go over then the characteristics of some of the things that separate them into the different groups, while we then focus really on the core reptiles, since we'll talk about this. Now, reptiles themselves are a paraphyletic group. So hopefully you remember what that means. Monophyletic groups are groups that all the members share a common ancestor, and then all the descendants from that ancestor are part of the group. That's a monophyletic group. A paraphyletic group means that that all the descendants of that common ancestor are not part of the group. So some of them are missing from the group. And that would be, in this particular case, the birds, right? Because we have from here's the turtles, and we'll get through, we'll talk about each of these. So here we have the turtles. The testudines is the actual name, but we'll just go with the common name. And tortoises, obviously they're related to one another, but they're slightly different. The tuatara are a group of sort of large lizards that are separated. They have a double row of teeth and a couple other features that separate them from actual lizards. Snakes are very close to the lizards, although they don't have legs. They share other features. Then we have the crocodilians. And then the birds. Now we would also have dinosaurs here along this particular branch. Right, this is kind of where they would generally fit in. We'll talk a little bit about them, not too much. And then over here, then we obviously have the mammals, which we'll get into last. So what is it that separates? All right, so in the paraphyletic part, right, so crocodiles are included with these other reptiles, right, turtles, snakes, and lizards, and we have the crocodiles as reptiles. However, birds aren't included in that group. The other option is cut out crocodiles to make a more monophyletic group with the turtles and then the lizards and snakes, but then there's no crocodiles in it, or alligators. They're separated. They're not reptiles, so they have to be something else. Instead, they're kind of put together. Why? Why are they all put together? Well, these groups, obviously, they're vertebrate. Obviously, chordates. Vertebrate. Tetrapod. Amniotes. They have scales, some slight variations whether the scales are dermal or epidermally derived, but they have scales that protect them on the outsides of their bodies. It was a common feature. Now, they don't have hair, so they don't have fur, which is what the mammals will have, and they don't have feathers, which is what the birds have. So that's one characteristic that kind of pulls them a little bit together. As far as skull types go, this is kind of also where we have some similarities and differences. So if you remember back, there was a while ago where we looked at skull types and talking about a cladogram, and we had an anapsid type. So that's this group here. The mammals here are a synapsid. So they're here. So we have some separation here with the skull type, and then all the rest of these, they're all diapsids. the birds and the rest of these here. So again, another reason why maybe the birds would be put in with this group, because they share this particular feature. And we'll talk about some other features that they share in common. And so what are we talking about there? So inside the skull, all right, there nares, there are openings for nostrils, there are orbits, or openings for the eyes. But anapsids don't have any additional openings in the skull. Synapsids have 2 additional ones, one on each side, so 1 per side, and those are we find it in the mammals. And then diapsids have 2 additional openings, 2 postorbital openings in the skull, and that's on each side, so a pair of them. And then we have all the rest of the birds, crocodiles, snakes, lizards, tuatara. They all are diapsids. They all belong to that particular group. So that's one of the things that separates them and pulls them apart. What do some of these groups have? Turtles, say, is a unique characteristic or trait. They have no teeth. No teeth. Okay. These groups here, snakes, lizards, they have epidermal teeth. So the teeth are derived and they're embedded in soft tissue. They're not embedded in the bone of the jaw. Whereas crocodilians and birds they have teeth embedded. So not all the diapsids have this, but their teeth are embedded in sockets, right, in the jaw, like our teeth are. So that's different. Obviously, it's a trait that could be evolved multiple times in different groups, but that's common here. Now you can say, well, wait a second, birds don't have teeth, but ancestral birds did have teeth, and then they lost them, as we can see in the fossil record. And so do the dinosaurs, which are then closely related here, have the teeth also in the jaw. So that's something that kind of pulls them apart. Another characteristic here that kind of put, again, with these groups, the turtles through the snakes, so kind of all these guys here, has to do with a part of their circulatory system. They have a 3-chambered heart versus, once again, these guys over here, 4-chambered heart. Now again, the mammals, they're going to have a 4-chambered heart. So we're going to see some interesting things, even though the mammals are pulled off, earlier on here, because they have this different skull type, and then they have their own unique features and traits, which we'll get to at the very end. We'll find that some of these things like the teeth in the jaw, the 4-chambered heart, we see them in mammals as well as the group of the crocodilians and the birds. Right? But we don't see them in the group of reptiles that contains turtles, through the lizards and snakes. They're kind of separate and pulled out that way. Something else that's a feature that is often brought up, usually around here, that has to do with the birds, the dinosaurs, and these guys here, are hip bones, which we haven't talked about in too much detail yet. We've talked a little bit about some skeletal structures, but we are going to get to that eventually to go through the whole skeleton. What we're looking at right now here is the pelvis, or called the pelvic girdle. I'm really just looking at half of it. So in the pelvic girdle, all these bones that are drawn here are repeated. All right, and so we're looking at 2 variations right here. So there are 3 major bones of the pelvis. There's the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. And what we'll find is that these are what we call bird-hipped versus lizard-hipped. And so in lizards, their pelvis has some variation to it. It's different than birds. what we'll find is in the dinosaurs, we'll have a number of dinosaur groups that have the bird hip, and then we have some dinosaurs that have the lizard hip. And that's one of the ways some of the dinosaurs are separated into different groups based on their particular hip structure. So it'd be good right now just to talk about that a little bit. What is the actual difference? Well, there's some bigger structural differences with the ilium, but largely it's same function, the same place. Same for the ischium, same function, same place. But where we see the biggest difference between the bird and lizard hip dinosaurs is in the pubis. The pubis of the bird hip dinosaurs is nested here right next to the ischium, whereas in the pubis it is pulled apart, right, and separated and oriented in the opposite direction, right, of the ischium. And so this allows a different type of mobility in these animals, especially that they might be much more upright runners standing on the two legs as opposed to all four. So the way in which they move, the way the joints move are going to be different between bird and lizard hipped animals, and whether those animals are, some type of lizard themselves or some type of dinosaur that's extinct. So those are a couple things to keep in mind. That's kind of, there's some extra information I'm posting on just reptiles in general, just some overall characteristics, but those are just kind of extra information. So the main thing is here really to take from this as far as who are the reptiles. Well, they're a group of, like I said, vertebrates that lay eggs, that have scales, and the group is, again, paraphyletic, so it's hard to just pin certain characteristics, because if we use the tradition of the reptiles being, including the turtles, as well, we have issues, as far as saying, oh, they all have this characteristic. Well, that's not true, because the turtles have a different skull type, but they all have this characteristic, but that might not be true because the crocodilians have different structures with their teeth or their bones or other features of them, or their heart and so forth. So, but kind of just know these particular things I pointed out. It's just a few details that you could look at. So skull type, make sure you kind of know those names, anapsid, synapsid, diapsid, and what it means and who has which type of skull. Know that. Know about the three-chambered heart in sort of this core group of reptiles, but that the crocodilians are different. The crocodilians are also different with their teeth being in the jaw, whereas either they don't have teeth here in the turtles, or they have the teeth embedded in the soft tissue in the other groups of snakes and lizards. And kind of who's closer to each other, something you should know, be familiar with, kind of which of the groups are the snakes and lizards obviously being closer together than the turtles, and the crocodilians being separated out. So the next thing what we're going to really do, though, is just focus on birds a bit, because birds are unique in an evolutionary sense. Now they kind of belong with this group of reptiles, so in some ways it's technically an extension of talking about reptiles, but we're just going to focus on the adaptations of birds that make them very unique, especially in relation to flight. All right, and then once we do that, we'll then just finish up with mammals, and then we'll be completed on going through the different groups of animals.